The first house that Dean and I ever bought wasn't much to look at, but goddamn, it felt like we'd made it. It was a dingy double-wide trailer sitting on a quiet little lot in a very tired trailer park. Lots of non-rolling vehicles, retired people, fixed incomes, and non-stop grilling. We lived in Middle America, a mid-sized town. I'm sure you all can picture it. But the house, that was ours. For years, we'd been renting cramped, tissue-paper-walled apartments, landlords that couldn't fix shit. Every month, we'd watch our paychecks disappear into rent and utilities, telling ourselves that eventually we would get ahead. One day, we would climb out of that hole of borrowing and call something our own. It only took 5 years. Dean had been working construction since he was 19, long days framing houses and hauling lumber in every kind of weather. I bartended 4 nights a week for almost 20 years. A little rustic family bar, elbow counter, big dance floor, brick bathroom. An older building, but it was familiar. Made a lot of good memories there. It didn't carry a 401k and it couldn't even promise to pay the bills, but it was a job that I was actually pretty good at. It took a long time to scrape the money together. Side jobs, overtime, skip vacations, and a lot of nights where we told ourselves that we'd celebrate later. When we finally found the trailer, it wasn't exactly what we imagined it to be. The siding was faded, streaked with dirt, and actual bird shit. One of the porch railings was loose, another cracked off completely. The back steps leaned a bit when you stood on them. But the trailer itself was site-built and surprisingly spacious inside. 3 bedrooms, a big living room, a decent kitchen. A lot was bigger than most of the others in the neighborhood, and it backed up against this strip of scraggly woods that made the place feel a little more private than the rest of the park. Dean walked through the front door that first day, looked around the living room and said, "We can make this work." He was already on board for something that needed a little TLC, knowing it would come at a little price, and so we did. The first few weeks were honestly some of the happiest that I can remember. We had a new routine. Dean drove out to the job sites early in the morning while I slept in after my shifts. I'd wake up around noon, make coffee, and start chipping away at whatever small repairs that we were tackling that week. Fresh paint in the living room, new cabinet handles in the kitchen, a deep clean that got rid of that weird smell the place had when we first moved in. The carpets took a few runs before it actually went away. Our neighbors turned out to be pretty friendly too. The guy across the street helped Dean fix the loose railing on the porch, and the older couple 2 trailers down brought over a plate of brownies our second week there. To this day, it's the best triple chocolate brownies I've ever had in my life. We even had a couple of small housewarming parties. Nothing crazy, just a few friends from the bar, a cooler of cheap beer, music playing through Dean's sound system while people wandered through the house, commenting on how much bigger it was than they expected it to be. We had some furniture, but not enough to totally fill in the way we wanted it to, at least not yet. For the first time in years, probably at least since we got married, it felt like we were actually winning in life. One night a few weeks after we moved in, Dean and I were stretched out on the couch in the living room, watching some dumb reality show that we were actually super into at the time. It was late, close to midnight. The house was quiet except for the low volume of the TV and the hum of the refrigerator off in the kitchen. I remember laying there on Dean's chest and the stray thump of his heart nearly drowning everything else out. I was half asleep when we both heard it at the same time. Footsteps. They came from outside, slow, creeping across the wooden boards of our front porch. Dean stiffened underneath me. His heart kicked to life under my ear. We both then turned our heads toward the front window as the footsteps passed in front of it, the faint shadow of somebody moving through those thin curtains. They were thick as light blockers, but still, a vague shadow barely cut through them. Nervous sweat came to life immediately on both of us. Then the sound stopped directly at the front door. Oh God, no. I couldn't remember if either one of us had locked it. The handle then twisted softly back and forth. The metal latch rattled against the lock with a quiet clack. Denied. The person on the other side then let go. Dean and I stared at each other, eyes wide. Neither of us saying anything, but I could tell he wanted to scream. A moment passed, then the footsteps started up again. They moved along the length of the porch toward the far end, boards creaking as they went. We heard the faint scramble of somebody climbing up over the railing, followed by the signs of branches rustling in a small thicket of trees that bordered that back lot. And then, nothing. Complete silence. Dean got up and walked slowly to the window while I stood there behind him, caught between grabbing a knife or calling 911. He pulled the curtain aside just enough to peek out it. The porch was empty. Nothing indicated who or whatever was out there. A nice, calm, dark evening beyond the glass. No footprints, no blood, no evidence of anything. Our yard beyond that was just dark, trees barely visible up against the night. Whoever had been there was now long gone. Dean and I barely slept that night. Every noise in the trailer sounded like somebody stepping back onto the porch again. Every time the wind moved through the trees behind the lot, I caught myself staring toward the front door, waiting to hear the rattle again. Hearing somebody pace the house put a fear into my heart that I never knew even existed, and I wasn't sure Dean and I were capable of protecting ourselves. By morning, we both agreed we needed to talk to the neighbors, get a read of everybody that knew about peeping toms or prowlers out here. The first place we went was the little house across the street. Bill and Margaret had been the friendliest people in the neighborhood since we moved in. Bill was already outside when we walked up, leaning over the engine of his old pickup. Dean quickly explained to him what had taken place the night before. Bill listened quietly, his expression turning to grimace. I knew before he spoke that he knew something we didn't. Margaret stepped out on the porch halfway through the story, arms folded. When Dean finished, Bill wiped his hands on a rag. "That sounds like Pfister," he said. Dean and I exchanged a look between us. "Who's Pfister? That can't be an actual name," I said. Margaret answered me. "He's the guy who used to live in your trailer." According to them, Pfister had lost the place about 6 months before we bought it. Missed payments, foreclosure, something along those lines. When the bank finally took the property, he apparently didn't handle it very well. "He had a complete meltdown," Bill said. They told us how he'd been seen storming around the yard after the eviction, kicking things over, smashing furniture inside the trailer before he finally was forced off the property, nearly at gunpoint, by the local sheriff's department. And Margaret said the sheriff had been called out there more than one time. "He drinks a lot, mean, crazy drunk. Used to chase his dogs around with a hammer," Margaret added. Bill nodded too. Couple of fights in the neighborhood over the years, nothing that stuck though, legally. The last time anybody saw him, he'd been standing in the yards yelling about how the place was his and he'd be back for it. By the time Dean and I walked back across the road, neither of us felt good about what we just heard. So later that morning, we drove to the police station, told them everything. Footsteps on the porch, the door handle turning, the story about Pfister. The officer that we spoke with was polite but matter of fact. Without any kind of evidence of a break-in or property damage, there wasn't much they could do. "Just call us if he comes back," he told us, and that was that. This all took place in the early 2000s, before any cheap cameras and home security systems were fairly common. Even if they had been, we couldn't afford them. Most of our savings had gone into buying the place, and like most new homeowners, we were on our own. Our version of home security was pretty simple. Dean had a snub node 38 special that he kept in a box inside the bedroom closet. We also kept a baseball bat behind the front door. In my mind, there was a block of kitchen knives on the counter, surgically sharp. It wasn't much, but knowing they were there gave us a little peace of mind. Bill and Margaret also promised us they'd keep an eye out. If they saw Pfister anywhere near the property, they'd call us or the police immediately. God, it was refreshing to actually have allies, actual boots on the ground to rely on. I made sure to tell them thank you every single day. For a few weeks, everything was nice and quiet. One afternoon, however, Dean and I pulled into the driveway after getting some groceries, and the first thing we noticed was the front door. It was barely hanging from the hinges, frame nothing but splinters. Jam detonated from some kind of extreme pressure. Somebody had kicked in our front door. Dean cracked his knuckles, told me to stay in the car. We didn't have a cell phone, and he wanted eyes on the inner workings of the house. He grabbed a crowbar from the back seat and walked up the porch steps. The door limped open the rest of the way when he pushed it in. He then disappeared through the damaged portal. That was the longest minute of my life before he finally leaned back out. Air rushed out of me, and for a split second, I thought I was going to pass out. He yelled that it was clear and waved me in. I popped the door open, walking on numb, useless legs. The living room looked like it had been hit by a tornado. Couch cushions on the floor, drawers pulled open, kitchen cabinets hanging wide open. All of my stuff was everywhere. All I could think was, why would somebody do this? What were they possibly even looking for? Somebody had gone through the house, tossing things aside like they were searching for something in particular, or maybe just destroying whatever they could. Was it just revenge, pure spite, blind rage? Who knows? We'd barely started walking the rooms when we heard sirens outside. 2 police cars pulled up in front of the trailer. A godsend. I almost started crying, if I recall. Bill and Margaret had heard the commotion from across the street and called it in, we later learned. They bailed our asses out more than one time. Dean stepped outside to explain that we owned the place and had just arrived. While the officers walked through the trailer taking notes, Bill stood in his driveway watching the whole thing. When one of the cops asked if anybody had seen who might done it, Bill didn't hesitate, hollering across the street. "It's gotta be Pfister," he said. "Guy's a decorated asshole. You know him, he used to live here. He said he'd be back, and now I think he has." And then suddenly the police were paying attention, asking all kinds of questions about the man called Pfister. Police stayed for nearly an hour. They photographed the broken door, the splintered frame, and the mess inside. One officer walked slowly through each room with a notepad, while the other snapped the pictures of all the damage. They talked about everything they recorded, just to see if they agreed with one another. Dean and I repeated the same story several times to them. When they finished, the older officer shut his notebook and nodded. "We'll start looking for him," he said. "Bars, cheap motels, places like that. He's got to be floating in a puddle of spit somewhere." He then pointed toward the driveway. "If he comes back, you call us immediately. Don't waste a second. This guy is clearly agitated about something." Watching the patrol cars drive off gave me this strange kind of relief. For the first time since the footsteps on the porch, it felt like somebody else was involved, somebody who might actually stop it. Not just our nice old neighbors, who were helpful, I'll admit it, but somebody with a badge, a gun, some kind of influence. Dean and I spent the rest of that day cleaning up, getting everything back to halfway normal. When we set the couch upright, shoved all the drawers back in the dressers, and swept up the splinters around the front door, Dean borrowed some tools from Bill across the street, managed to get the door back on the hinges well enough that it would lock again. It was a mangled mess, but it was something to block up the open air. By evening, the trailer looked almost normal. We ordered some cheap takeout, sat on the couch watching the same dumb reality show that we always had on. The calm felt unreal after everything that had taken place. The police were looking for him. Maybe they'd find him before he tried anything else. I smiled around my crab ragoons and prayed for a quick, clean conclusion. And eventually, we went to bed. Nothing strange happened that night. No footsteps, no door handle rattling, just quiet and still. We didn't sleep great either way, though. The next morning, Dean woke up early for work. He was pulling on his boots when I finally opened up my eyes. "You sure you're going to be okay here?" he asked me. I nodded. Dean was in the middle of a big job, wanted to knock a day out of it. It had a big paycheck waiting on the back end, so the only way to secure it was to finish it up. "I'll keep the door locked," I said. I knew he needed to go. He hesitated, leaned down and kissed me. "Call 911 if anything feels off, all right?" A few minutes later, I heard his truck start up. Gravel sloshed as he pulled out of our driveway. The trailer went to quiet again, not a peep. I stayed there in bed for quite some time, just enjoying the silence. The stress from the day before had finally caught up with me, and I felt strangely calm. Eventually, I got up for a glass of water, wandering back toward the bedroom, and decided I really wasn't ready to start the day yet. So I laid back down. No big deal, right? I work in the evening, so my mornings are kind of just for me. I crawled into bed and dozed. Must have been asleep for maybe another hour or so. When I awoke, something immediately felt wrong. I couldn't place it, but it was like the place was filled with this invisible smoke, something dangerous putting me on edge. I stepped into the hallway and froze. Our front door was now wide open. For a brief second, my brain could not process what I was actually looking at. And then I saw him. A middle-aged man stood in our living room like he owned the place, leaning against the counter with a beer in his hand. Greasy hair hung around his face. His eyes moved slowly across the room. He looked furious at everything that he was scanning. When he noticed me, he smiled. It was the most hateful expression I'd ever seen. I turned to run, but I panicked. A real-life short circuit. I understood deer in the headlights now, fight or flight, and I had neither. I stuttered to take a step and then found myself going nowhere. Behind me, the front door slammed shut, and his boots pounded down the hallway. I made it halfway to the back room before a fist tangled up into my hair, ripping me backwards. My head slammed up against the wall, hard as hell, and white stars quickly filled my vision. "Pretty little thing," he muttered. "Damn, real pretty, huh? You home alone? Little bombshell home alone?" He tore at my shirt, ripping it open while I screamed. He then dragged me into the bedroom, one ragged fist at a time, tearing at every part of me. He moved quickly, yanking up the closet, grabbing whatever he could find. Socks, neckties, anything he could find to bind. Within minutes, my hands and feet were tied painfully behind my back, and he shoved a sock into my mouth, then slapped me across the face. Mostly my ear, but it still made me see stars again. I went quiet and just begged him to stop. Then he left the room. All I could do was lie there crying while he tore through the house again. Drawers slamming, cabinets banging, things crashing onto the floor. Eventually, the footsteps came back down the hallway. Pfister stepped into the bedroom, sizing me up and down. "Look at that," he said quietly. "I bagged a good one. You're really here alone, huh?" He reached into the closet, pulled out Dean's belt. The first strike landed across my chest. The next one cracked across my neck. He used the leather end to whip me over and over. And then the buckle came down hard across my face, my eyes, my nose, my teeth, my scalp. Easily the worst beating of my life. Through blurred vision, the last thing I ever saw was Pfister standing over me, calmly unzipping his pants. The job site was loud, but it didn't do anything to keep my attention. All morning I just kept thinking about the trailer, about the busted door frame and the guy that went through my house, about the cops stomping around our living room with flashlights and notebooks, promising they'd find the guy who did it. Pfister. I just kept reading that name over and over, and it made my stomach turn. I swung my hammer harder than a locomotive, driving nails into a beam while the crew worked around me, sawdust floating in the heat. All I could smell was buzzing lumber. "Easy, man," one of the guys laughed. "You're gonna split the damn thing." I forced a grin but didn't say much. My mind kept drifting back to my wife, the way she tried to act normal that morning, the way she insisted she'd be fine staying at home. "I'll clean up the mess and watch TV, don't worry about me." But I did worry. By late morning, the sun was already beating down on the site, turning the gravel lot into a shimmering oven. Somebody called out that it was almost lunch. I checked the position of the sun and wiped sweat from my face. He wasn't lying. The trailer park was only a few miles away, 10 minutes there, 10 minutes back. I set my hammer down along with my belt and the rest of my tools. "Hey, I'm gonna run home real quick," I said. One of the guys looked over at me. "Everything all right?" "Yeah," I said back. "I'm just gonna grab lunch and then I'll be right back." He shrugged and went back to work. I climbed into my truck and pulled out onto the road. That drive back felt long, but I knew it was only because of what was in my head. I kept thinking about the broken stuff I'd had to fix, the scattered belongings, the feeling that somebody had touched every part of our personal lives. Pfister. I kept gripping that steering wheel like I was actually choking the daylights out of him. When I turned into the trailer park, everything looked normal. A couple of kids were riding their bikes in the entrance, a neighbor watering the flowers on her porch, dogs running batshit in every direction. Just another quiet afternoon. I pulled up beside our trailer and shut off the engine, and that's when I noticed the door. It wasn't closed. It sat slightly open, just a few inches off the frame. a flat bar open in my house. At first I figured maybe my wife had stepped outside, maybe she was behind the trailer messing with the garden or talking to one of the neighbors. I got out of the truck and closed the door quietly. The afternoon felt strangely still. No TV inside, no sounds of her moving around or anybody for that matter. Just the faint rustle of aluminum siding in the breeze. I stood there for a moment, just listening. "Babe?" I called out. Got nothing back. A cold knot was forming in my stomach and I started toward the door. As I got closer, I could see the wood around the latch, splintered, but all of it new, like somebody had kicked it in a second time. My pulse started thumping in my ears. "Hey!" I called out louder this time and still got nothing. I was only a few steps from the door when it happened. A scream ripped throughout the trailer. My wife. It was raw and terrified, the kind of scream that just doesn't leave any doubt that something terrible is happening. She didn't fall. This wasn't a spider. Somebody was hurting her, and everything inside me snapped. I shoved the door open so hard it fell to pieces, and I bolted. I didn't bother with a weapon of any kind. I looked around, my place was destroyed. Coffee table was flipped over, chairs knocked down, drawers ripped out and scattered across the floor like somebody had dumped the whole house upside down. I shouted again, and another scream answered from the back bedroom. I followed the trail of wreckage down the hallway, stepping over broken picture frames and scattered clothes. The bedroom door was halfway open. I kicked it the rest of the way in. What I saw in front of me made the world go red. My wife was on the bed half naked, hog-tied, a strip of cloth jammed into her mouth, and on top of her was Fister. The greasy bastard had really thought he still owned the place, this fucking dump barely worth calling a home. I felt myself turn into a caveman in those precious few seconds. I was gonna split this guy's head in half, just like my ancestors would do. His pants were halfway down, one hand pinning her shoulder while she thrashed beneath him. And for a split second he looked up at me, surprise flashing across his face. And then I was moving. I grabbed the back of his shirt and ripped him off the bed. Creating space was obviously the first priority. The longer he touched her, the worse it was. We slammed into the dresser so hard, the mirror exploded into confetti all around us. He swung wild and caught the side of my jaw, but I barely even felt it. I drove him backward and we crashed into the floor, smashing into the nightstands as lamps shattered, and the two of us just started beating the hell out of one another. The first punch that I threw landed clean. The second one didn't. I didn't really have much of a play beyond that. Fister recovered fast, and I really wasn't ready for that either. He drove his shoulder into my chest and we slammed into the wall. I lost my breath. My head cracked up against the paneling and stars burst across my vision. Then he hit me, once, twice, and a third punch snapped my head sideways and sent me crashing to the floor. Then came the boot. My wife was screaming behind us, the sound muffled by the cloth in her mouth, but still sharp enough to cut through and find my ears. She was screaming for him to stop. Fister didn't hear her. He climbed on top of me and started hammering punches into my face, and I tried to block, tried to shove him off, but the guy was a lot heavier than me and completely out of his mind. One fist smashed into my nose and warm blood spilled down my lip. For a brief moment, I really thought I was a dead man. My wife continued screaming, thrashing on the bed. Fister glanced back at her for half a second, and that ended up being the opening I needed. I shoved upward, twisting my body and moving away. He teetered back and I scrambled onto my feet, dizzy and half blind, but at least I was standing. He rushed me again. I grabbed his shirt, shoved him backward with everything I had. We crashed into the front window of the bedroom, the big one with cheap thin glass, all of which exploded. The pane shattered outward and Fister went halfway through it, the broken edge tearing across his back. He screamed and stumbled away from the frame, blood soaking through his shirt. "I'm bleeding. Damn, I'm bleeding." I didn't wait. I ran for the closet, the pistol still inside the shoebox on the top shelf right where I kept it. My hands were shaking, but I grabbed it and turned back toward the bedroom. Fister was staggering into the hallway, clutching his back. I closed the distance and swung. It didn't need to be outright murder. The pistol cracked across the back of his head with a dull thud. He reeled sideways, grabbing his face. Before he could recover, I shoved the barrel as far as I could into his ear. "Don't fucking move," I said, and for the first time, He looked back at me scared. We stared at one another for a second, and then he turned and ran. He bolted down the hallway, crashing through the living room, and blasted out of the front door into the woods behind the trailer park. I stood there breathing hard, the pistol still raised. The hell just happened to my wife, to my house? She made a choking sound behind me. I dropped the gun and rushed over to her. Her wrists were tied behind her back, her ankles were bound together. I pulled the cloth from her mouth and she gasped out for air. "Oh my God, Dean." It's okay, I said, working the knots loose. "He's gone now." Once she was free, she wrapped her arms around me and couldn't stop weeping. After a minute, I got up, locked the door as best I could, and ran to the neighbor's place, and they called the police. Cruisers arrived in just a few minutes, officers moving through the trailer, tracking the damage before moving off into the forest. My wife sat wrapped up in a blanket, stunned out of coherence. One of the officers knelt beside her. "Did he assault you, ma'am?" he asked. She wiped her eyes and shook her head. "No, but he was going to, if Dean hadn't come home." Her voice broke. He was seconds away. More tears after that. I was just so relieved to hear that he actually didn't assault her. Not long after that, the officers started searching the woods behind the trailer park, guns out, dogs, shotgun teams, a whole 9 yards. I think they found him about 30 minutes later. Pfister had made it maybe 400 yards before collapsing in the creek at the bottom of the hill. Heart attack. The ambulance loaded him up, but he ended up dying on the way to the hospital. It was such an utter shock, a bizarre ending to the whole ordeal, but it put us at peace, even gave us a little sense of justice. The dumb bastard killed himself. It took nearly a month to repair everything he had done to the trailer. New window, new door, half the furniture replaced, but after that, things were quiet again, and the house finally felt like it was actually ours.